Hey, it's Art. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're taking the strategies and concepts of the mid-side miking technique and applying them to our mixers to get more width and better mono compatibility out of our mixes. This video isn't necessarily on mid-side processing per se. I'll leave a card to another video I have specifically on mid-side processing if you'd like to check that one out before getting into this video. But without further ado, let's hop into the digital audio workstation and have a look at how we can apply the concepts of the mid-side miking technique to get more width and better mono compatibility out of our own mixes. All right, so the mid-side miking technique utilizes two microphones, one unidirectional or cardioid microphone pointed toward the source, and then one bidirectional or figure eight microphone coincidentally placed next to that cardioid microphone pointed to effectively 90 degrees and 270 degrees. That is meant to pick up the ambience of the sound or the source being captured by the cardioid mic. And then in the mixer, we will effectively have the unidirectional microphone panned directly to the center. And then with the signal from the bidirectional microphone, we'll actually duplicate it, pan one copy to the hard left, the other copy to the hard right, and flip the polarity of one of those copies. If we didn't flip the polarity of one of the copies, we would effectively have still a mono signal because the left and right channels would be exactly the same from both the center panned channel from the cardioid mic and the two exact copies, hard panned left and hard panned right. But as soon as we flip the polarity of one of those, we get a great sense of width from the bidirectional microphone signal, while also having something that will completely collapse and cancel itself out if we happen to sum our mix to mono, or if the stereo mix is played back on a mono playback system. So to reiterate, it's a great way to get a sense of width out of our track while still maintaining a very strong sense of mono compatibility. Of course, in applying this technique, we will completely lose the sides information if the mix happens to be summed to mono, and that may not always be the right move in the mix, but it is a technique to utilize if, again, we want width alongside great mono compatibility. I talk more about mono compatibility and its importance in another video. I'll leave a card to that up in the top corner and a link to it in the description box down below. And the first link in the description box below is going to have all of my free PDFs that I put together explaining 100 of my favorite music production techniques. You can get those for free clicking the first link in the description box down below. Sign up to my newsletter and I will send them to you right away. So let's get into the demonstration now. So I effectively have this synthesizer. This is a serum patch, very simple, sawtooth with a low pass filter. If I was to play this, I think I have some distortion on it as well. And just some portamento time, and it's a mono patch, so it means that I can't play multiple notes at the same time. I actually have a video going into detail about all of the basic waveforms, including the sawtooth. It's a very in-depth video. If you'd like to learn more about the basic waveforms, there'll be a link in the description box down below for that video. You can check it out after this one. But we have a nice mono synth. I'll close this out. We can see in the correlation meter we have +1, meaning that it is entirely mono. If we had a -1 signal, then that would mean that the left and the right are completely out of phase. So they're identical copies, but completely out of phase with each other. Now, setting things up the hard way, or as we normally would when doing mid-side miking, I'm actually going to send this serum patch, I'll actually rename this serum, to bus 2. And so we are sending this mono track, or our cardioid, if we are keeping the comparison to mid-side miking, to bus 2. Bus 2 comes in here, and because the bidirectional mic in the mid-side miking technique is typically there to pick up ambience, I'm going to insert a reverb on this track. You can use other effects, but I find that reverb is the best one to get more width and more dimensionality out of this technique, which is ultimately what it's about. You can see here I have large and bright room, pre-delay 8 milliseconds, length 1.3 seconds, size 100%. I only have wet, there's no dry because it is an effects return. Although in this case, I could bring up some dry because there's also going to be a little bit of that direct sound that would ultimately hit the bidirectional microphone. Again, if we're trying to be strict to the miking technique. And then what I actually have done in this channel is I have no output. And so the mono signal comes in here. It goes through a mono reverb as if it was a mono microphone. And then there's no output, but I'm sending it to bus 3 and bus 4. And then bus 3 comes in here, hard pan to the left. Bus 4 comes in here, hard pan to the right. You see that bus 4 has a gain on it, and this is so that I can flip the phase. So whenever the gain plugin is engaged now, there will be a polarity flip. This says phase invert. Technically speaking, it's a polarity flip. And when the gain is disengaged, then there will be the same exact signal on this MS left and MS right. So if I was to solo just these and then play something here, you hear the reverb see that this is +1 up here, so we are still completely in mono. And then if I turn on this gain, we are completely -1, and so completely out of phase between the left and the right channel. And if you're listening in headphones, you can really hear the difference there. It almost sounds a bit uncanny. Again, in mono, stereo. And then if I bring in the dry signal as well, this almost sounds like some Benny Benassi. What is that in B flat? Very cool. Shout out to Benny. And so with the polarity flipped here, I'm going to close out of this for a moment. We have some stereo information, and with the polarity unflipped, very much mono. We're still getting the reverb, but it's completely mono, and now we can get more width out of that reverb. You can really hear it on the tail end, the width, especially if you're listening in headphones. Now, if we go to the stereo out, I have this gain plugin set up right here, and I can actually sum the entirety of the mix to mono by simply clicking this. In this case, there's not really much of a mix. I just have one instrument, but here it is with the proper setup here. I have the right channel of the reverb signal polarity flipped, but now if I was to sum the entirety of the mix to mono, there's no more reverb. In stereo, plenty of width in the reverb. Mono completely goes away. If I was to get rid of the polarity flip now in the right channel so that these are both in mono, it wouldn't matter whether the mix was in mono or not, because everything is in mono to begin. And a simpler way to set this up is to actually use a single channel, and we can do this in Logic Pro. I'm going to send the serum to bus 1. Bus 1 is now coming in right here. I call this MS single. And basically I set up a plate reverb this time, the little plate EMT 140 emulation from Sound Toys, one of my favorite. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that this is my go-to plate reverb. And then I have one gain right here, not to do anything by the controls, but rather to split this mono signal into a stereo signal. And then once I have the stereo, I can apply this second gain, and then I can opt to phase invert or polarity flip the left or the right channel. And I have a correlation meter right here that we can have a look at now. And I'm sending to bus 1. So if I go over here to serum, that's in mono. If I flip the polarity of the right-hand channel or the left-hand channel, you see that the reverb now is completely out of phase, the left versus the right. And we get some width out of the entirety mix if I open up the correlation meter for the stereo out. See that we are not completely at +1. And of course, if I open up the gain now for the stereo out and sum this to mono, the reverb will go away. Stereo. Nice and wide. Mono completely disappears. Again, it's a great way to get additional width in the stereo mix while maintaining a drier, more upfront, mono-compatible mix. It's not always the best move, but if you're having issues with mono compatibility, whenever you sum your mix to mono, there's a lot of phase issues going on, you can opt to try out this style of mid-side processing to effectively eliminate a lot of that when you end up summing to mono. Now, before we get into the full session, so I can show you how I would go about using this in a production or a mixing session, if you are enjoying the content thus far, please hit that like button. It really helps out small channels like this one in the YouTube algorithm. I greatly appreciate that. Let's go. All right, here we are inside a production session for a track I'm working on called Brace Yourself. I plan on releasing this sometime soon in 2024. And you'll see here that I have a pretty weird piano, and I'm playing basically the mother of all chords right here. And it is basically just alternating triads stacked on top of each other all the way up. And then I'm running that through an ARP. This is what it sounds like by itself. There's a whole whack of processes on it. I'm gonna mute this send for now. Then I'm sending it to a single mid-side width channel right here. And if I open back up the mixer right here, we can actually send it to bus 6. And this is going through a little altar boy, formant -12 pitch up, a little plate, a little bit of EQ, some saturation going through the American Plexi amp, mixed at about 50%, so there's some parallel processing going on in here. And I have this gain control to turn a mono signal into the stereo signal. You just saw that in the demo. And I have this other gain where I'm inverting the right, leaving the left alone. And then the correlation meter, just so that we can see whether or not we are actually completely out of phase or not. So here it is, the piano and the return. See that the return is at -1. And if I was to invert that, completely in mono. And then the stereo out, if I was to monoize that, we completely lose that send. Though it's still sending out audio, it's not actually being outputted. Now in the context of the mix, here it is without the return. And with. Just to give more of a sense of ambience here. Actually went quite far away from the output of this dry track right here in this effect, much more than we naturally would, obviously, in the mid-side microphone technique. But that's the whole point, is to take concepts that may not necessarily directly apply to production and mixing and apply them to various genres of music and various instruments to get some creative results. That's the whole point of this. Now, I didn't only do this with this strange piano, I also did it on a snare. And if I exit out of all of this, we go down to the snares that I have this snare sample, if I solo it. And basically applying different amounts of time compression and expansion to a single sample just to get some more sonic variety out of that. I have a video going into detail on getting more sonic variety out of your drum samples. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below. Then you can see here that I doubled this up, the exact same sample. And this is effectively another way to set up your pseudo mid side, is to actually just copy an audio signal. And so in this case, it's the exact copy. And then on this verb, I have trusty old little plate, followed by the X for Records LFO tool. So I'm gonna get some pumping out of that. And then of course the gain and the correlation meter, just to show again, if we are in or out of phase. By itself, let's actually cycle a short section. So that's all the way to the -1. If I was to invert this back, that is completely mono. So a good amount of reverb there. And then if I was to monoize the stereo out, reverb goes away. In the context of the mix, and if I was to monoize this, the snare and that lead weird piano still have a nice upfront image because they're panned to the center. They lose a little bit of the extra character that was brought on by these stereo effects. But at the same time, these stereo effects don't add extra unnecessary phase cancellation if the mix is summed to mono. This is still very much in the production phase. This is by no means mixed, but I thought it was a great example to show you two different ways of utilizing this mid-side style processing in our productions. If you'd like more videos on music production techniques, especially these more niched ones that not many people are talking about, please consider subscribing here to the Mighty Microphone YouTube channel. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, or anything to add to the conversation, please do so in the comments down below. I do my best to reply to everybody. And if you've made it this far into the video, there will be another video worth checking out. It'll be on a card here on the end screen of another music production technique that I think you'll really dig. So check out that one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.